You know, there are a lot of games out there in the indie world that mimic games in the, well, not indie world. One game that indie games mimic that I haven't played a lot of is the Mega Man series, at least in indie form. But thanks to a game on the coming soon section of the eShop that I really had my eye on, that has changed. Today we're going to talk about a game that a lot of people refer to as Female Mega Man. Here's my review of Metagal for the Nintendo Switch. The story of Metagal follows a group of female androids created by Dr. Ray. One day, a villain shows up to attack and abduct both Ray and all of the girls to be able to use them for war. After the abduction happens, one of the earlier models named Meta shows up, realizing everyone's been abducted and sets off on an adventure to rescue them. Now, these sorts of games don't have a lot of story, and this doesn't really have a lot of story, but it has more than I expected it to have. There aren't very many cutscenes across the course of the game, but once you get to the ending, there's actually a lot of lore that's dropped. Now, we're not talking about a literal mountain of lore, but it has a lot to explain all of the characters in the game, why the game happened, and a little bit of background information that many of these types of games just don't have. When it comes to gameplay, Metagal is a 2D side-scrolling platformer with combat elements. It follows the classic Mega Man formula very closely, outside of a few things that it changes up to make itself unique. So as you go through the game, you're going to be platforming across side-scrolling stages, fighting off enemies with projectiles, and of course every stage ends in a boss fight where you can defeat them and get their special weapon. Because of this, the way you progress through the game is very predictable. Once you start the game and finish the tutorial mission, you have a level select screen, where you can choose any of the main 4 bosses of the game, go through their stage, and then move on to the rest, eventually clearing them all and unlocking the final 4 stages so you can go and finish the game. And of course, the farther you go in the game, the more you're going to see that Mega Man formula with hidden upgrades and secret areas of the stages, and the classic boss rush you have to do before you can tackle the final boss. If you think about it, this is a lot of the Mega Man formula this game uses, but I did say earlier this game changes up a few of those elements to make it unique. And that is in the form of special weapons, playable characters, and the game's difficulty. First, let's talk about how this game handles special weapons. Every Mega Man game has special weapons that you get for defeating each boss, but how you use them here is a little different. First of all, one of the special weapons you get at the start of the game is a healing special weapon, meaning you don't have to go look for upgrades if you want to have the ability to refill some of your health in the middle of combat. The trick here is how these special weapons are used. Instead of having a finite amount of ammo, you have an energy gauge that recharges every time you use a special weapon. So you can use each special weapon pretty much an infinite number of times outside of the healing one. You just have to wait 3 to 5 seconds for that gauge to recharge before you can use them again. This is especially useful because some of the stages have areas that are designed for you to have to use certain special weapons to be able to navigate and get to the end of the stage. And that brings us to difficulty, which I'll touch on for just a moment. This game definitely is hard, but it's not extremely hard. There is a lot of intricate and technical platforming that you have to do, and it can get frustrating, but the game has a very forgiving continue and rebirth system. When you reach a checkpoint, you can infinitely continue at that checkpoint. You don't have a certain number of lives before you have to start the stage from scratch. You can also pick up little rings called rebirth rings to help this further. Whenever you die, you can choose to do a rebirth instead of a continue, and instead of restarting at a checkpoint, you restart at the beginning of the room where you died. And finally, let's get into characters, which is one of my favorite aspects of this game. When you clear the game for the first time as the main character, Meta, you gain the ability to replay the game as any of the other main bosses that you fight throughout the game. Although there is no story content when you replay as one of the other characters, they have their own custom movesets and can do a lot of things that Meta cannot do, including going through their own stage and fighting Meta as an unlockable boss. Speaking of the post-game stuff, let's talk about content and length. Considering this game only has 8 stages and only costs $5, I was expecting to barely get an hour out of this game before I was completely finished. By the time I'd actually beaten the final boss and unlocked all of the other characters, I'd spent around 3 hours in the game, much longer than I was expecting to. And of course that 3 hours is not counting messing around with the other playable characters you unlock once you beat the game. For a game that only costs $4.99, I'd say that is plenty of content to go around. Now let's talk about controls for just a second. My main awkwardness with the control scheme is how it sets up dash. Typically in games like this, dash is set to the A button or the circle button if you're a PlayStation fan. This game has it set to the X button. This makes it very awkward because I'm not really a fan of double tapping an arrow button to do a dash when I only have a split second to do said dash. The problem here is the fact that you can't remap any of the buttons to anything else. If I could redirect dash to say ZL or ZR that aren't used in the game, I wouldn't have any problems at all. But unfortunately, you can't. Now let's talk presentation, which is mostly good. Graphically, this game looks very similar to the Game Boy Advance Mega Man games like the Mega Man Zero series. For what it's trying to replicate, it does look good, at least until you start moving. Whenever you start running left or right, you see a lot of blurring around your character, both in docked and handheld modes. I'm not talking like massive, I'm having a migraine blurring, but enough that it's very noticeable. Now with performance, I don't really have any complaints. The frame rate's steady, it never froze, it never crashed, load times are very quick, everything is optimized well. Now let's touch on battery life, which is huge as expected. Metagal has a battery range of 4 hours and 46 minutes on high settings, up to 6 hours and 57 minutes on low setting. Almost 7 hours. Now, in conclusion, Metagal is a fun platformer that takes a lot from Mega Man, but has just enough stuff that's unique to not feel like it's just Mega Man as a girl. Now, on the downside, the blurring while you're moving and lack of control remapping really are a bummer, but honestly, with over 3 hours of content for only $5, this is a great platformer and Mega Man fans really don't have a reason not to get this. Reviews to Go rates Metagal for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at reviewstogo.com.